Armed police swept to the scene of a shooting in central Paris on Friday after a gunman opened fire at a Kurdish cultural centre and a nearby Kurdish cafe. At least 3 people were killed and several others wounded. Prosecutors said they were looking into a possible racist motive for the attack as an investigation into the incident was opened. Multiple gunshots were fired on a street lined with small shops and cafes in the capital's busy 10th district. Authorities said a 69-year-old man was arrested. The prosecutor said the suspect had been detained a year ago for an attack with a sabre on a migrant camp in Paris. Reuters was not immediately able to contact the suspect's representatives. Local media reported the suspect to be a French national.
The U.S. Congress passed a massive, nearly $1.7 trillion government funding bill on Friday, including record military spending and emergency aid to Ukraine, just hours before a midnight deadline.
On this vote, the motion is adopted.
The hard-fought legislation was approved by the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives on a near-party line vote, following Senate passage the previous day. The bill includes more aid for students with disabilities, additional funding to protect workers' rights, and more job training resources, as well as more affordable housing for families, veterans, and those fleeing domestic violence. Its passage averts a government shutdown, which would have forced federal agencies to furlough workers and shutter non-essential services beginning at midnight Friday. House Republicans and some Senate conservatives opposed the bill, saying it was riddled with wasteful spending that has stoked inflation. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, who has been jockeying to become the next Speaker of the House, railed against the bill.
This is a monstrosity that is one of the most shameful acts I've ever seen in this body.
Outgoing House Speaker Nancy Pelosi responded.
It was sad to hear the minority leader earlier say that this legislation is the most shameful thing to be seen on the House floor in this Congress. I can't help but wonder, had he forgotten January 6th? Indeed, this is the day of immense patriotism.
The Senate passed the bill Thursday on a bipartisan vote of 68 to 29, with the support of 18 Republicans, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Democrats said the bill boosts national security, with a record $858 billion going to the Department of Defense, up from $740 billion last year. Ukraine would get nearly $45 billion in new emergency U.S. aid. The debate in Congress over the bill was punctuated by a visit Wednesday from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who thanked Americans for bolstering his country's war effort against Russia and argued the U.S. funds were a good investment.
Freezing wind and snow pummeling the city of Buffalo, New York on Friday prompted local officials to ban all cars other than emergency crews from the region's roads.
The roads are freezing. The roads are going to be like an ice skating rink.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul warned all New Yorkers to hunker down and stay inside as a massive winter weather system pounded the state.
This is a life-threatening, dangerous event. Protect yourselves, protect your families. Do not travel.
More than 2/3 of the U.S. population was under extreme weather alert on Friday as a deep freeze enveloped much of the country ahead of the holiday weekend. With a column of bitter cold that stretched from Texas to Montana starting to march eastward, the National Weather Service said more than 240 million people in the United States were under some sort of winter weather advisory on Friday. A shopping center in Wausau, Wisconsin, showed the temperature dipped to negative 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Forecasters said a blizzard over the U.S. Midwest had formed into a, quote, bomb cyclone over Lake Erie. The extreme weather disrupted households and holiday plans just before Christmas. About 1.5 million U.S. homes and businesses were without power on Friday, according to the tracking site poweroutage.us. More than 4,000 U.S. flights were canceled Friday, according to flight tracking service FlightAware. Along the East Coast, the Weather Service said rain and westerly winds pushing seawater to shore could cause 3 feet of shoreline flooding.
Riot police fired tear gas to push back an angry crowd in Paris late on Friday after a gunman killed 3 people at a Kurdish cultural center and nearby cafe in the French capital. A fire raged in the street just a short distance from the scene of the shootings as projectiles were thrown at police officers. A lawyer for the Kurdish Cultural Center told Reuters that all 3 of those who died were Kurdish. 3 others were wounded, one of them with life-threatening injuries. Earlier, protesters chanted, "Martyrs never die," as Kurdish leaders called for better protection for their community. The country's interior minister said police were reinforcing security at Kurdish community sites.
I asked all the police services in Paris and elsewhere in the national territory to protect the places where the Kurdish community gathers. The killer is French. He is 69 years old. He was not considered an extremist by the intelligence services such as the General Directorate for Internal Security or the Paris and National Intelligence Services. Obviously, he wanted to attack foreigners. We will find out from the judicial inquiry led by the public prosecutor if he was specifically targeting the Kurds. For the moment, no element makes it possible to know it.
Authorities said the French assailant they arrested had recently been freed from detention while awaiting trial for a saber attack on a migrant camp in Paris a year ago. Kurdish leaders have long called for better protection of their community since the high-profile killings of 3 Kurdish women a decade ago. As evening fell in Paris, police vans lined the streets near Saint-Denis Gate as riot police stood guard and investigators combed the scene of the shooting, which French President Emmanuel Macron called a heinous attack.
U.S. stocks closed up on Friday as investors weighed fresh data that showed slowing inflation against rate hike and recession fears. The Dow and S&P each gained more than 0.5%, while the Nasdaq added 0.2%. The Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, or PCE, the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, showed that prices continued to cool in November, rising just 0.1% last month after climbing 0.4% in October. William Northey is Senior Investment Director at U.S. Bank Wealth Management.
Some of the more pertinent factors that are impacting the market today are certainly a confirmation of decelerating inflation. We saw the PCE come out today, and it confirmed what we'd seen out of the CPI just last week, which is several consecutive months of lower levels of year-over-year inflation. And that really plays into the context of how will the Federal Reserve respond to lessening inflationary pressures as we turn the calendar into 2023.
Investors have been jittery since last week when the Fed vowed to stay the course until it achieves its 2% inflation goal and projected rate hikes to above 5% in 2023, a level not seen since 2007. Energy shares were the biggest advancers throughout the session as oil prices gained following news of Moscow's plans to cut crude output. Tesla shares at one point touched a more than 2-year low as CEO Elon Musk's promise to not sell his shares for at least 2 years did not reassure investors. And shares of News Corp gained sharply after a report that billionaire businessman Michael Bloomberg was interested in acquiring either its subsidiary Dow Jones, owner of the Wall Street Journal, or rival newspaper The Washington Post.